nightmares.
Name's Munda. I've been out here on the edge of what used to be Denver for more than 3 years, though most folks don't count days anymore. I do. That number, 1201, matters to me. It reminds me how far I've come from the man I used to be. Before all this, I was a sheriff down in Otero County. Badge, cruiser, everything. Spent most of my life trying to hold the line. These days, I run an auction yard where people barter food, fuel, or meds in exchange for infected. We call them snags. The auction's set up on the remains of an old retail center off Highway 85. You can still make out the names on the cracked signs. Discount Dental, Wings and Subs, Western Porn. Now it's all rusted freight containers, makeshift stalls, and scaffold walkways made from twisted steel racks. Everything's patched with fencing or plywood. People live behind their own walls, and no one moves without a reason. You get caught looking too long at someone else's trade, you might get stabbed before you can explain. I built the auction yard because there was a need. People figured out pretty early that the infected, if you caught them right, could be used. Tie one to a post near your compound, and it'll keep strays and looters from wandering close. Rig a shock collar, muzzle it, and it'll pull a cart. The real traders figured out how to wrangle them. I made the place where deals got done. Over time, it became more than trade. It became entertainment. We've got a fighting ring behind the south end of the lot. Used to be the loading dock for the grocery store. Now it's a sunken pit surrounded by concrete, with chain link fencing and scrap steel panels welded to form a cage. Some nights it's quiet. Others, people line up for a spot on the bleachers. Whatever we've scavenged from old buses or bolted to the asphalt. They gamble with food, water tabs, ammo, but mostly, they come to watch some poor soul fight a snag barehanded just for a few cans of something edible. None of this makes me proud, but pride died back when the radios stopped working and people stopped burying the dead. I keep order because no one else can. I'm not the loudest or the strongest anymore, but most people don't cross me. I'm older, 53 last time I kept track. But I've survived long enough to look like someone who shouldn't be questioned. My only real help is Jana. She was a junkie before the fall, strung out and skeletal when I caught her trying to pick through a trader's medkit more than 2 years ago. I nearly shot her then and there, but she didn't run, just stared straight back at me, waiting. I gave her a job instead, cleaning the holding pens, sorting barter slips, checking weights. She's still hooked on whatever she can get, but she knows how this place works better than anyone. When things get bad, I trust her more than any of the clean-faced cowards pretending to play fair. The morning started like most. I was doing rounds along the pen cages near the east wall. 5 snags packed into welded pipe holding cells. One was slumped in the corner, missing its bottom jaw. Another had a compound fracture and was dragging its leg uselessly, but it could still lunge when close enough. I kept the cattle prod in hand, just in case, but I didn't need it. These ones were tired and mostly dehydrated. We don't feed them much, makes them slower, easier to handle. Jana was already up, checking the bindings and scratching notations into her tally board. She nodded at me without speaking. She does that when she's sober, keeps her mind focused. I asked if the new batch was weighed yet. She said not yet, but pointed out one of them had a healed-over bite wound and might be from an older catch. That could mean it was less aggressive. That doesn't make it safer, just less likely to burn through its energy before sale. We had 2 pit fights scheduled for the day, both repeat challengers, desperate types. One was a kid named Ruck, maybe 21, who came limping in last week after trading his boots for antibiotics. He said he was ready to try again, said he'd rather die in the pit than starve outside. I let him in. If someone wants to step into that ring of their own free will, I don't stop them. I don't force anyone. I just provide the platform. The sun was already cooking the asphalt by noon. By the time the first match started, a thin crowd had gathered around the edge. Not many were talking. Most just watched. Ruck came in with a length of steel pipe and a rag tied around his neck. We dropped a male snag into the pit. A strong one, missing its fingers but still quick on its feet. It had enough meat left on its bones to be dangerous. Ruck held his ground longer than I expected, got in 2 solid hits, drew blood, but not enough to stop the thing. When it lunged, he stumbled, went down hard, and for a second it looked like he was done. But then he stabbed something sharp into its eye, broken rebar, probably hidden in his boot, and the thing stopped twitching. I gave him the standard reward: 2 cans of beans, 1 bottle of clean water, and a medical strip if he could stay conscious long enough to use it. He limped out without looking back. Crowd didn't cheer much. People don't anymore. Survival's not a celebration. I was back in the stall with the ledger open when I heard shouting outside. 2 traders had rolled in dragging something behind a stripped-down golf cart. I walked out expecting another snag, maybe a bloater that hadn't burst yet, but this one was different. It was in uniform, tactical gear, dusty but intact. Arm patch said United Shield, private security, ex-military grade. Jana was standing next to me, silent. The infected was muzzled and hog-tied with copper wire, but it was watching, not flailing, not groaning, just watching the people around it like it understood what was going on. I told them to back off, and I had it moved to the reinforced cage behind the compound. I didn't let it go into the trade pool or the pit. I wanted it isolated. Something about the way it moved. It wasn't just instinct. Jana gave me a look like she wanted to argue, but held her tongue. I locked the cage myself and double-checked the welds. We left it sitting in the dirt with its arms still bound, breathing slow and shallow, staring straight through the bars like it had something to say. I've seen a lot since the world went sideways. I've seen smart ones, quiet ones that react faster than they should. But this one, it gave me a bad feeling. Not fear exactly, just the kind of feeling you get when something's off, but you don't know how or why. I've made a lot of mistakes since day one. I've buried most of them. That snag in the United Shield gear, he wasn't like the others. He didn't rock back and forth like a caged dog, didn't growl non-stop or snap at shadows. He just sat there on the dirt, bound, mouth taped, eyes fixed on the perimeter of the cage. Not random eye movement. He was checking fence lines, watching patrol routes, noticing. Jana stood behind me for a while before finally walking off. She didn't say anything, but I could tell she was itching. Not just from withdrawal either. Something about that snag got into her head too. It wasn't even doing anything, just existing wrong. I waited another 10 minutes, watching it breathe slow and steady, then turned back toward the auction floor. The afternoon crowd was picking up. Someone had dragged in a pair of emaciated snags in matching prison jumpsuits. They looked half dead before they even turned. One of my handlers traded for them, cans of peaches and half a quart of ethanol. Not bad, considering one of the snags still had decent muscle on him. Some buyers pay more if they think they can recondition the infected into runners for hauling. I think it's a waste of time, but I don't argue if they have clean trade. 2 traders got into a fistfight over an oxygen tank around 3 o'clock. Old model, but full. One of them claimed it came from his sister's clinic in Cheyenne. Other guy said he found it abandoned in a shack west of Greeley. Didn't matter. Neither one of them could prove it. I stepped in, took the tank, and split it. Jana did the math, divided the value, and gave each man equivalent rations. No one liked it, but no one bled out either. That's what counts. By late afternoon, heat had set into everything. Metal was too hot to touch barehanded. Water barrels were down to a third. We only refill twice a week. Truck comes from north side. Filters snowmelt if the route's clear. Jana was up on the scaffolding, patching a tear in the overhead tarp. She had stripped off her outer jacket, and her arms looked thinner than last month. I made a mental note to check if she was eating enough. Not because I cared much about appearances, but if she collapsed mid-shift, I'd be the one cleaning up the mess. While she worked, I walked the outer lane, checking on long-haul traders camped by the fuel drums. A guy from the west side had a snag locked in a cage built from truck grills. It was missing both legs, but was still active. He said it had been crawling for over 20 miles, trying to bite through the steel mesh. I offered him a half-gallon of diesel and 2 packs of freeze-dried soup. He took the deal, and I had the handler drag the thing into holding. Sometimes you get good ones like that. Clean aggression, low damage. Later, after final check-in, I headed back toward the reinforced cage, the one with the United Shield snag. Jana had already gone to lockup. Rest of the staff were running patrol or asleep. Sun was low. Shadows were stretched out across the busted pavement. I stood 10 feet from the cage, just watching. It had moved. Not much. Just shifted position. Was kneeling now, back straight, face tilted toward the entrance gate. Still taped up, still restrained, but not slumped or lifeless. No groaning, no gnashing. Just still. If it weren't for the occasional blink, you could think it was some dummy in gear. I walked around the cage slowly, looking at its limbs, checking for irregularities. Sometimes people get sloppy when they catch them. Broken wrists, damaged spines, anything that might ruin a sale. But this one looked intact. Scar on the shoulder where it probably took a hit during whatever fight ended its run. Boots were missing, but the pants were tucked tight. I saw the glint of a metal ring on its belt. Dog tags. I crouched down. They were clean, wiped, still legible. I didn't touch them, just read, Alden J. blood type O neg, no religious preference. Then the thing looked at me. I stood back up, still no sound from it, but the movement was intentional. It didn't flinch when I approached. It adjusted to me. That was new. Most snags have only 3 priorities: sight, sound, blood. This one was doing something else. I radioed Jana, told her to come to the cage. She didn't ask why. She never does when I use that tone. 10 minutes later she arrived, hair tied back, skin shiny from sweat. She stopped at the edge of the clearing and crossed her arms. "You sure it's infected?" she asked. I nodded. Pupil drift, breath cadence, minor tremor in the jaw. It's turned. Then why's it not trying to rip the bars apart? I don't know. That's what worries me. She stepped closer, knelt near the gate, and stared into its face. Could be partial, like those wanderers out east. Takes weeks for full neural degradation. Maybe the ones with higher resistance last longer. I didn't like the theory, but I didn't have a better one. I'd seen different strains burn faster in some people than others. Still, I had never seen one sit this calm with a live human 10 feet away. "Don't tell the handlers about this one," I said. "Let the story stay quiet." "Why? You think it's military?" "I think it's something we shouldn't rush to monetize." Jana stood. She wasn't arguing, just calculating. "You want to keep it here?" "For now. Observation only." She gave a slow nod and walked off without another word. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. Just sat in my corner of the shipping container with the lantern dimmed, flipping through old ration records and patrol reports. The hum of the generator didn't comfort me like it used to. Around 3 in the morning, someone knocked on the side panel. Not the front door, directly on the metal. Jana's voice came through low. "You need to see this." I pulled my coat and stepped out. Her face was pale in the lantern light, twitchy from lack of sleep or something else. "The cage is open," she said. I moved faster than I have in months. When we got there, the outer fencing was still sealed. No break in the wire, no breach. But the inner cage door, the one locked with the double latches, it was swinging open. The snag was gone. Not killed, not dragged, gone. We searched the lot for nearly 40 minutes. Nothing. Not a trace. One of the southern guards reported movement outside the perimeter, but dismissed it as a wild dog. I didn't argue with him. I didn't say what I really thought either. The moment we confirmed the cage was open and the snag was missing, I already knew we weren't dealing with anything ordinary. I've seen snags tear through chicken wire and throw themselves against brick walls until their bones snapped, but I've never seen one wait until no one was watching, slip out without a sound, and vanish like smoke. That thing moved with a purpose, and I had let it in. Jana followed me back to the main trailer. Neither of us said much. The rest of the market was dead quiet. Only the generator hummed. A dog barked somewhere in the east stalls, then nothing. I unlocked the supply room, handed Jana a short barrel and 6 shells, and loaded up my sidearm. It wasn't a reaction out of panic, it was habit. I wasn't sure if that snag would come back, but I knew I didn't want to be caught flat when it did. At first light, I gathered the guards. 4 of them. 2 were halfway alert. 1 was hungover. 1 hadn't even heard the cage door swing open the night before. I kept it short, explained that a specimen had escaped, and that we didn't know if it was still within market limits. I didn't say how it got out or how it avoided leaving any kind of trace. If they thought it was a fluke, they'd be less likely to panic. Panic ruins trade. Jana stood in the back of the group, arms crossed, jaw set. I knew she didn't buy the specimen line. She had seen it too. She was smarter than most of the others, but she also knew when to stay quiet. I gave orders to sweep every stall and holding area, top to bottom. Anything suspicious, blood, bent wire, strange smells, had to be logged. No fighting ring matches for the day. I didn't want bodies bleeding in the arena with something unknown prowling outside. By mid-morning, the traders were already frustrated. Word had spread. People don't know how to keep their mouths shut when they're hungry. A man from the North Camp was yelling about needing insulin and claiming I had shut the place down to hoard medicine. Another accused me of selling infected to private buyers for experiments. That one made Jana laugh, but I didn't. Conspiracies spread faster than truth when food is scarce. I threatened to pull trade from anyone who stirred the pot. That quieted most of them. Around noon, we finally found something. One of the holding cages, an older unit near the back fence, had its bottom corner peeled up. Not torn, peeled. The bolts were unscrewed, not broken. That meant tools. That meant time. And no one saw a thing. The infected we had stored inside, 2 females, 1 older male, were still present, still bound, but they were silent. Normally they groaned or thrashed when you got close. These ones just stood there, watching, breathing slow. One of them tilted its head slightly when I stepped in front of the gate. That's not something they do. Jana came over, crouched beside the loose bolts, and poked at the dirt with her knife. "It's recent," she said. "Less than 12 hours. No dust blown back over the footprints." "You think someone came in?" I asked. She didn't answer at first. Maybe, but if they did, they were quiet and smart enough not to leave a trail. I stared at the snags again. The one closest to me blinked, slow and deliberate. That's not how they blink, not unless something in there is still aware. By early afternoon, I called off the sweep. Guards were hot, tired, and starting to mumble amongst themselves. Jana and I met back inside the main trailer. She dropped onto the crate she used as a chair and opened a tin of jerky. I sat on the edge of the desk, watching her chew. "You ever seen one behave like that?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, but I've heard stories. Some scavengers say the ones in the northwest act differently, less twitchy, more coordinated. That's rumor. So was reanimation, until it wasn't." We sat in silence after that. The lantern buzzed slightly from a low charge. I could hear someone chopping wood outside. Then Jana said something I hadn't expected. "You ever wonder if some of them are faking it?" "What do you mean?" "Like, what if the virus doesn't take full control? What if parts of the brain stay active? Like muscle memory, recognition, but the host can't speak or react normally? What if they're just stuck inside?" I didn't like the thought. Not because it scared me, but because it gave the infected more credit than I wanted to believe they deserved. I had built an economy around them being less than human. If they were still in there, that changed everything. That night, we set up 3 guards on rotation. I offered bonus rations to anyone who stayed alert. No one liked it, but they agreed. Jana stayed up with me again. She didn't ask to. She just didn't leave. We shared a cot and listened to the wind rattle the fencing outside. Around 2 in the morning, we heard metal shift near the west barricade. We both sat up instantly. I grabbed the radio and called the nearest patrol. No answer. We didn't wait. Jana grabbed her weapon. I pulled on boots and moved fast down the central lane. It was dark, but the market had enough solar lamps wired to motion sensors to give us intermittent light. As we neared the barricade, I heard a low scraping sound. Not frantic, measured. We turned the corner and stopped. The gate was open. Not wide, just enough for someone to slip through, and standing 10 feet from it, arms by its sides, was one of the snags we had counted earlier, the same one with the broken jaw. It looked at us, then took a step back. Jana raised her shotgun. I told her to hold. The snag didn't lunge. It didn't hiss. It took another step back, turned, and walked through the gap in the fence. We didn't follow. We secured the gate, double-wrapped the chain. I made the decision right there to burn that entire section of the compound the next morning. Every holding cage, every panel of fencing, every snag in that zone. I can't prove anything yet, but I've seen enough to know when control is slipping. That snag didn't escape by accident. It wasn't freed. It walked out, because it knew how. The air shifted in the days that followed. Traders were uneasy. Guards slept with one eye open. Even Jana looked different. Slower to laugh, quicker to check every latch and lock twice. People don't always need the full truth to know something's wrong. They feel it in how you move, how you stop talking, how the routines change. And I had changed mine. I'd ordered the old Western pen block dismantled. We dragged the cages out, lit the torches, and burned the infected inside them where they stood. Some were still active, clawing at the steel until the heat softened their bones. Others just slumped and cooked like meat on a spit. Nobody said a word while it happened. That night the regulars came through. Locals, wanderers, folks looking for scraps or bets. One of them, Deeks, a filthy drunk that clawed his way into every pit match he could for a mouthful of booze and some temporary applause, decided I was to blame for the fear crawling through the market. He was sitting on the edge of the ring steps with a half-empty jar of mash in one hand and a busted-down cricket bat in the other. The wood was chipped from the last 3 fights, and his knuckles were purple. I walked past him, mind on other things, and he shouted after me loud enough for everyone around to hear. "Hey, boss man, that right? You letting snags just walk away now? Maybe next time they'll run this dump for you." I stopped mid-step, didn't turn right away. He kept talking, getting louder. "All that muscle, all those rules. Just decoration now. What's next, huh? Gonna kiss the infected and tell us to stay polite?" I turned then. Walked up the stairs slow. He was grinning, showing grey teeth, thinking he was winning the crowd. "You done?" I asked. "You're scared," he said. "You pretend like you're in charge, but you lost control. Admit it. You ain't the sheriff no more. You're just another soft." That was enough. I grabbed him by the neck with one hand and didn't wait for anyone to stop me. He barely made a sound as I hauled him up and slammed him backward, letting his weight roll down every hard corner of that steel staircase. His body flipped twice before it landed at the bottom with a crack. One of the bones punched through his pant leg, the other snapped at the knee. Nobody moved. Not the guards, not the pit gamblers, not even Jana. I stood at the top for a moment, breathing through my nose. Then I looked at the others. "I don't ask for loyalty," I said. "I ask for order. You want chaos? You want fear? Then keep flapping your mouths about things you don't understand. But if you like eating hot food and sleeping behind wire, then you'll let me handle what needs to be handled." Deeks groaned at the bottom of the steps. I stepped around him and didn't look back. An hour later, I was in the trade office. Sat down with the head merchant Doran, a sharp bastard who ran most of the supply lines through the Rockies. He had set up a chain of go-betweens that fed everything from radiator hoses to ketamine through our market. The man wore goggles he didn't need and carried a clipboard like the world hadn't ended. I told him flat what had happened, that one of the infected had walked out, that it had come in wearing contractor gear, military tags, and showed signs of retained motor control. I told him it had vanished, and I suspected it wasn't acting alone. He didn't interrupt once, just sat there, lips tight, watching me. When I finished, he asked one question. "You think it'll come back?" I nodded, I think it already has. We agreed on one thing. If word got out that we couldn't keep the infected contained, trade would collapse. And if the trade collapsed, the settlement would fall with it. There wasn't enough food left to go back to hunting or fishing. Not here. Not this close to the fire zone. I told Doran to watch his incoming carts. No unknown wranglers. No last-minute deliveries. Everything had to be inspected, logged, and held for 3 hours before entry. He agreed, and told his guards to prep the back lot for longer quarantine. That was when the cart arrived. 2 men I didn't recognize rolled in with a 4-wheeled mule cart pulled by an old electric quad. The engine was sputtering, and the cart was wobbling from an uneven axle, but they made it through the gate without protest. Inside the cart were 4 infected, 3 adult males, and 1 collapsed in a steel muzzle, arms bound behind its back. At first glance, nothing looked unusual. They were strapped tight, cloth over their heads, boots duct taped to keep them from kicking. But as I walked past, something stopped me. The 4th snag, the one lying limp with the steel muzzle, had dried blood across its vest. Not random blood spray, intentional. It had been used to cover up the logo. I reached down and wiped it with my glove. United Shield. I peeled the cloth back. Same dead eyes. Same stiff posture. Same face. It was the same snag that had escaped. Jana saw it at the same time I did. She stepped back, reached for her belt, but I waved her off. It wasn't moving, wasn't reacting. I waved the 2 drivers over. "Where'd you get this one?" "South of Larkspur," the one on the left said. "It was just roaming. We lured it into an alley. Took both of us to bind it." I kept my face still. "It was just walking?" "Yeah, slow. Didn't fight much. Thought it was tired." I told them to wait at the gate. I had the infected taken to the reinforced cage again, same one it had broken out of. This time, we added a second layer of chain, 2 locks, and mounted a spotter cam overhead. Jana and I stood back once it was secured. The snag hadn't resisted the whole time. Even as we dragged it into the cage and locked it down, it didn't move. I told the guards to leave. Jana and I watched it for another 20 minutes. It blinked again. Same pattern. Too slow. Too deliberate. I leaned in closer. "This time," I muttered, "I want to see how long you're willing to wait." Jana was watching it too, arms folded. "You think it came back on purpose?" "Maybe. Or maybe it was dropped off. Maybe whoever, or whatever, is watching us, wants to see what we'll do." She didn't reply. She just kept watching. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I watched the spotter cam from inside my office. Every few minutes the snag would shift, not randomly, just adjusting its knees, repositioning slightly. It was staying awake, not conserving energy like the others, not wasting movement. At 3 in the morning, it stood up fully and faced the camera. Just stood there. Didn't move again for nearly 2 hours. I watched the screen until my eyes ached. The thing didn't sway, didn't lurch, didn't slump. Just stood perfectly upright like it was waiting for an order or trying to be seen. I checked the feed timestamps multiple times. I had Jana watch it for the last 20 minutes to confirm I wasn't imagining it. She didn't say much at first, just stood behind me, arms crossed, lips twitching like she wanted to chew on her sleeve. After a while she spoke. Her voice was lower than usual. No sarcasm, no hesitation. "Put him in the arena." I turned in my chair and looked up at her. She was dead serious. I waited, thinking she might walk it back, but she didn't. "You want a real answer?" she said. "We put him in the pit, see what he does. If he's playing dumb, he won't fake it in front of a crowd. If he's different, then we need to see how different." I didn't like the idea. The arena was for punishment, for barter bets, for twisted entertainment. It wasn't supposed to be an experiment lab, but she was right. We needed to know. We'd already seen him escape. Now we'd seen him come back. What if he wasn't just observing us? What if he was measuring us? By midday, I made the decision. Quietly. Only 3 guards knew. I picked a slot in the afternoon that wasn't marked for trade matches. We didn't tell the crowd anything special. Just said a new specimen was going to be tested. That usually got attention on its own. Jana had prepped the cage. She put the thing on a chain collar, shackled its wrists with reinforced cuffs, and posted 2 armed guards on either side in case it tried anything early. It didn't. It just walked when she led it. No shuffling, no dragging. Step for step like it remembered drills. The crowd was louder than usual, even before it started. A fresh face had signed up for the ring. Kid couldn't have been older than 22. His name was Coulson. Said he came from the East Block. Had a brother who disappeared 2 weeks ago on a scav run. Said he needed rations and a med kit. He was lean, wiry, nervous as hell, but trying to act brave. His weapon was a piece of pipe wrapped in tape with a fan of nails sticking out the end. It looked sharp, but it was clumsy. He didn't look ready. Jana opened the outer gate of the cage. The infected man, the one we still hadn't named, walked forward without resistance. No snarling, no hissing. He crossed into the ring, eyes scanning the crowd like he was sizing up the terrain. The crowd quieted. Even the gamblers stopped shouting. Everyone could feel something wasn't right. Coulson took 2 steps forward, swung the bat low, and aimed for the gut. I've seen dozens of snags take hits like that and barely react. This one didn't let the blow land at all. He moved, not fast like a twitching runner, but with precision. One hand came up and caught the bat in mid-swing, stopping it cold. His other hand clamped down on Coulson's arm. Then, in one smooth motion, he pulled. The crack echoed loud. Coulson's scream hit half a second later. The arm separated at the shoulder like it had been ripped from a chicken. Bone exposed, nerves twitching. The kid collapsed, rolling in the dirt and kicking blindly. The infected looked down at the detached limb, dropped it, then picked up the bat, turned it in his hand once, then raised it above his head and brought it down on Coulson's skull. Once, twice, 3 times. No screams after the second hit. By the time he stopped, the kid's body wasn't moving. The bat clanged on the floor as it rolled free. And then the infected turned, slowly, calmly. He didn't snarl. He didn't charge the crowd. He just looked around. His gaze passed over the traders, over the fence line, over the camera tower. Then he stopped. He looked at me. I was standing on the platform behind the glass observation window. He held eye contact, longer than felt normal. I don't know what I expected. A lunge, a sprint, another kill. But he didn't move. He just hissed. Loud, guttural, sharp. Not an instinctive cry. A message. It lasted a second, and then stopped. That's when the buzzing started. I thought at first it was the generator again. Then I realized it was outside the outer fence. North wall. Low frequency. Steady at first, then rising. The infected man didn't react. He just dropped back into a crouch and sat in the dirt again. The alarm was triggered by one of the scouts. She was screaming into the radio about movement outside the perimeter. I ran from the booth down to the gate line. Jana was already there. She had a rifle in one hand and her belt unfastened, half dressed from changing before the match. The northern fence was shaking. That wasn't unusual. Snags tested it all the time. But this wasn't a few mindless bodies dragging through the trees. This was a herd. First came the shadows through the smoke, figures bobbing left to right, staggering but coordinated. Then came the sound, the kind of mass pressure you feel in your bones. Dozens of bodies pushing against chain link. And then, unbelievably, climbing. We've had breaches before. One snag squeezes through. A few crawl under if the dirt loosens from rain, but they don't climb. They can't climb. Their coordination is gone after transformation. But here they were, hands on the chain, legs dragging up behind them, bodies pressing higher as the lower ones shoved from underneath. Like ants, like a planned movement. The fence buckled, the metal shrieked as the top rail popped. One of the infected rolled over it and dropped hard into the mud. Then another, then 3 more. Guards opened fire. Panic broke in the ring. The crowd scattered toward the alleys between stalls, pushing over crates and market tables. Someone knocked over a fuel barrel. Another tripped and screamed for help, pinned under a broken pallet. I ran toward the ring gate. Jana was with me, barking orders. Gun up. We reached the arena edge, and I looked back to the center. The infected man was still crouched in the dirt, head turned toward the breach, unmoving. It was like he had been waiting for this. One of the guards aimed at him. I knocked the weapon aside. "Don't touch him," I snapped. "He's not the problem anymore." Jana glanced at me like she didn't believe what she just heard, but she didn't argue. She turned and opened fire on the ones breaching the inner yard. I shouted for a fallback line and ordered everyone to drive the breach toward the southern gate and into the arena kill zone. That had always been our last resort plan. Same way ranchers trap wild cattle when things get too chaotic. I never expected to actually use it, but once the infected started climbing the fence, the choice disappeared. The guards knew the drill. They pushed people back behind stalls, blocked off the food corridor, and pulled the breach toward the arena's lower entry point. The infected swarmed in a tight column, tripping over each other, spilling through the mud and smoke. The skirmish lasted more than 20 minutes. I stayed near the entry lane with 2 guards, one on each side of me, their rifles locked against their shoulders. I let them do the shooting while I kept my focus on the infected man crouched in the arena. He hadn't moved at all. Not when the breach widened. Not when the gunfire erupted. Not when one of the infected tumbled down the steps and rolled 5 feet from him. He didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't even turn his head. It was as if he knew the herd wasn't there for him at all. My guard on the left, a man named Halvan, kept glancing between me and the infected man as he fired. Halvan was tough, but he had a nervous streak. He wasn't good at hiding fear. Each time he pulled the trigger, he'd jerk sideways, probably expecting something to grab him from behind. Jana was ahead of us, taking careful shots and calling out impacts. Even she couldn't hide how unsettled she was by what we were seeing. The infected weren't running wild. They were pushing inward, almost in a pattern. They weren't stumbling across the settlement at random. They were forcing us toward the arena. By the time the dust settled, the ground was littered with bodies. The air smelled like burned fuel and hot metal. We counted more than 50 infected piled across the southern field and close to the bleacher walls. Some were still twitching, so we finished them with controlled strikes. 12 humans lay dead. Guards, traders, wanderers. Some had turned already. Others never got the chance. And those were just the ones inside. Outside the fence, it was still unknown how many had gathered, but failed to break through. We didn't have enough manpower left to check, so we sealed the gates and wrote down what we could. People were crying into their sleeves, dragging the wounded toward the med truck, or wandering in shock through the rubble. A few stood around the arena steps like they were waiting for someone to tell them what to think. I didn't comfort anyone. I didn't try to explain the losses. My attention was still on the infected man inside the ring. He hadn't moved an inch. His knees were tucked neatly under him. His hands rested on the dirt. His posture looked almost orderly. He watched me through the gap in the railing, just as calm as he'd been when the fight first started. I told one of the handlers to bring me a chair, a metal one from the old donut shop stall, the one with a stable backrest. I told him to set it inside the ring, but not close enough for the infected man to grab me. The handler didn't question it. He just dropped the chair where I pointed and left the arena without looking behind him. I stepped into the pit and closed the gate behind me. The metal screeched as it latched. People outside fell silent as they realized I had gone in alone. Jana tried to follow, but I raised a hand to stop her. She stayed at the top of the stairs, breathing hard, watching every move. I sat down slowly, revolver in my right hand, cleaver in my left. That cleaver had a story behind it. I'd used it on thieves in the early days. Stole from the market, lost fingers. Simple rule. No one liked it, but it kept the peace. The blade was dull in some places, chipped along the spine, but it was still solid enough to remove a hand in one clean strike. The infected man blinked when I settled into the chair. If I hadn't been watching so closely, I might have missed it. Not a frantic reflex blink like normal snags. This one was slow and steady, controlled. He shifted only enough to face me directly. His mouth was still closed. No drool, no snarling. He just stared. If he hadn't massacred that kid earlier, you might have mistaken him for someone waiting for a verdict. I sat there for nearly 40 minutes. Every few minutes, I'd adjust in the chair or tap the cleaver's handle against my leg, trying to coax a reaction out of him, but he didn't respond to noise or movement. His breathing stayed constant, not shallow like a dying infected, not ragged like the starved ones, just steady, controlled breaths from a chest that barely lifted with each motion. Around the 20-minute mark, something shifted outside the arena. Not a sound, just the atmosphere. The crowd had moved farther back. Guards had stopped pacing. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Even the surviving traders stood still, holding bags of supplies without negotiating. That kind of silence doesn't happen in a place like Spur Market unless something has broken into people's nerves. I kept my eyes locked on the infected man. When he finally moved, it wasn't sudden. He lifted his head a little, almost like he was adjusting his neck muscles. Then he opened his mouth just enough to show his teeth. He didn't roar. He didn't lunge. He let out a low, guttural rumble that never rose in pitch. The hairs on my arms stood up from the sound alone. I'd heard thousands of infected vocalizations before. This one was not the same. This was deliberate. He closed his mouth again, straightened his posture slightly, and then he did something that made my stomach tighten. He looked past me. Not at me. Past me. Over my shoulder. Toward the crowd. His eyes passed over the guards, the broken stalls, the twisted fencing. Then they settled on Jana. She stiffened but didn't move. I could see her hands trembling from across the pit. I tightened my grip on the revolver. The cleaver's wooden handle felt warm against my palm. I didn't know if he was picking targets or studying weaknesses, but I knew I was done watching him. I stood slowly, keeping both weapons drawn. The infected man shifted his weight, but did not rise. He tracked my movement without showing any signs of agitation. Nothing happened for a long minute. Just the wind scraping dust across the concrete and the faint rattle of the outer fence. The infected man blinked again, then tilted his head in a way that reminded me of someone listening to distant instructions. He made a faint rattling grunt as his throat tightened. I raised the revolver. He didn't react. Before I could decide whether to fire, a voice shouted from the walkway above us. Someone had spotted new movement beyond the outer barricade. It wasn't the herd from earlier. This was something else. The guards hurried to the far wall, rifles angled outward. Jana left her perch and ran toward the fence to see for herself. I waited, listening. After a few seconds, a guard yelled something to the others, but his voice got swallowed by the rising noise coming from the northern perimeter. It was the same low buzz we heard before the first breach, but now it had a rhythm. Short bursts, long hums, then short again, like signals. The infected man finally reacted. He turned his head toward the sound and let out a single sharp growl. Not loud, just decisive. Then he crouched lower, muscles tensing under his sleeves. It wasn't a wild panic stance. It was readiness. More noise surged against the north wall. Multiple impacts, bodies slamming into metal, chain links rattling as if dozens of hands were working them from the other side. The guards opened fire again. I heard bullets striking bodies, the scrape of boots shifting on concrete, the panic that always surfaces when the infected gather in numbers. The infected man rose halfway from the crouch, his posture straightening. He turned toward me then, not aggressive, but not timid either. For the first time, I saw something behind his eyes. Some kind of intention. Not thought, but something parallel to it. Something uncomfortably close. I didn't wait for the situation to escalate inside the pit. I backed toward the exit, revolver raised, cleaver hanging behind me like an anchor. As soon as I reached the stairs, I motioned for the guards to seal the arena gate. Everyone followed that order without argument. No one wanted him loose again. No one wanted a repeat of the earlier bloodshed. I stepped out of the ring just as the infected outside renewed their assault on the fencing. The barricade shuddered, loud enough to hear through the entire market. Smoke drifted over the lot, mixing with the smell of dust and burned clothes. People were gripping whatever they could find: pipes, machetes, rebar. It was the first time in months that the whole settlement looked ready to abandon everything and run. The fear became a weight in the air. It changed the way people moved, the way they looked at the shadows between stalls, the way they flinched at every new impact on the metal siding. I signaled the guards toward the north wall, pushing them into position even though some were shaking hard enough to fumble their bolts. The buzzing outside rose to a steady hum that pressed through the steel like vibration. That sound didn't belong to the infected. It was man-made, steady, structured. When it cut out abruptly, the infected outside screamed, slammed into the wall in one violent wave, then went quiet. The silence afterward was worse than the noise. We approached the wall in a slow line. Debris was piled 3 feet high, and bodies were stacked at the base of the fence like discarded lumber. At first, I couldn't see what the guards had been shooting at. Then, one of the spotlights caught a narrow metal object stuck between the fence posts. It was a transmitter, crude, dented, taped together with scrap wiring and a chipped solar cell. The buzzing we heard earlier hadn't been random. Someone had planted it there. Someone had signaled the infected. I pulled it free and examined it under the light. It wasn't military grade. It wasn't anything from the old world. Someone built this from spare parts. Someone close. Someone who knew how the infected responded to stimuli. Jana came up beside me and stared at it with a look that wasn't confusion, but understanding, as if she had expected something like this to surface. I didn't ask her anything. Not yet. I was already running through every possible name in my mind. The 2 men who had delivered the infected man earlier were being held near the supply crates under guard. Both were shaking, trying to explain themselves before I even got close. Their story had holes everywhere. They claimed they found the infected wandering near Larkspur, claimed they didn't know about the breach, claimed they didn't know who hired them. But I had dealt with enough liars in my law days to see the truth in their eyes. They were scared, but not of me. They were scared of whoever gave them that infected man. Before I could press further, one of the guards yelled that we had movement inside the yard again. Not infected, people. Traders were breaking into stalls, grabbing whatever they could carry before fleeing toward the southern gate. Panic spreads fast once the walls shake. All it takes is one person screaming, "They're coming again," to trigger a stampede. I sent 2 guards to secure the gate, but they were too slow. The crowd split them away and shoved through the corridor leading out of the settlement. They didn't care if the outside was worse. They only wanted distance from whatever was controlling the infected. Smoke collected between the rows of stalls, turning the remaining lights into hazy glows. The place didn't look like a market anymore. It looked like a ruin that had been decaying for years. Supplies were scattered across the ground. Half-empty water jugs rolled through puddles of blood. A bag of dried rice had burst open and mixed with the dust and ash. Even the sound of the wind felt different, carrying a cold emptiness through the broken storefronts. When I returned to the arena gate, the infected was no longer crouched in the center. He had moved to the far side and stood perfectly upright, staring at the exit door as if he knew exactly where the path led. His posture was relaxed, almost expectant. I motioned for the guards to reload, but something in Jana's expression stopped them before they lifted their weapons. She was standing to my left, her shoulders tight, her breathing uneven. At first I thought she was reacting to the chaos outside, but her eyes told a different story. She wasn't looking at the infected man with fear. She was looking at him with recognition, a quiet, broken kind of recognition that made my stomach twist with something sharp. I asked her where she had gone earlier during the breach. She didn't answer. I asked again. Her hands twitched at her sides. She swallowed hard, kept her eyes on it, then finally stepped away from me. She reached into her jacket and pulled something out, a long metal key with a wire loop attached to it. Not a normal key, not one we used for the cages. It was a personal tool, handmade, designed to unlatch the secondary locks. She didn't explain it. She didn't have to. I knew what I was looking at. The betrayal wasn't sudden. It had been growing in her for days, maybe weeks. I'd seen her watching the infected man longer than she needed to. I'd seen her hesitate around the cages, listening for sounds I couldn't hear. She had been waiting for something, and now whatever she had been waiting for was happening. She walked past me toward the arena door. I told her to stop. She kept moving. I raised the revolver, ready to fire into the dirt near her feet just to break her focus, but she turned before I could. Her face wasn't angry. It wasn't scared. It was hollow, like she had already made her peace with whatever she was about to do. "You don't understand," she said. Her voice cracked. "He's not what you think." Then she unlocked the outer gate. This stepped out as if he had rehearsed the movement. No rush, no aggression. He moved beside her, matching her pace. For one brief moment, he turned his head toward me the same way he had done in the ring, and I saw something that made my pulse jump. An expression. Not human, but not empty either. A kind of awareness buried deep. By the time I raised the revolver in my hand, the gap between us had stretched too far to take a clean shot. Jana disappeared past the row of collapsed vending stalls, her boots striking the ground with a rhythm I had heard 1,000 times on quieter days. The infected man followed her without hesitation, moving in a straight line, his posture steady and controlled. He didn't look back again. He didn't need to. His confidence in the path ahead told me he had known this would happen long before any of us saw it coming. The smoke made it hard to see beyond a few yards, and the dust from collapsed fencing rolled across the market in slow waves. It felt like walking through the remains of a place that had already died before tonight. I moved past the arena gate, gripping the cleaver and pistol, careful with every step. I expected infected around every corner. I expected ambushes. I expected to find bodies. Instead, I found emptiness. The market had been abandoned by nearly everyone who had survived the earlier attack. I didn't hear children crying. I didn't hear traders arguing. The silence was heavier than anything the infected could produce. When I reached the south corridor, the narrow path squeezed between the old liquor store and the shipping container we had used as a currency office, the smell of fuel and burned cloth was strong enough to sting my eyes. Someone had thrown lanterns in their panic, and the ground was scattered with broken glass and melted plastic. The darkness ahead was broken by faint light where the roof panels had fallen away, showing the evening sky streaked with smoke. I moved slowly, checking each stall door, looking for signs that Jana had passed through here. The dirt was disturbed, footprints scattered, some deep from running, others shallow and flat where someone stumbled. The infected man's trail was easier to follow. His movement left a narrow path of compressed dust. No dragging, no stumbling. Every step was placed with purpose. As I walked, a thought settled in my head like a cold stone. Jana had been watching him long before he escaped. She had known something I didn't. She had been preparing herself for this long before tonight. I replayed every time she lingered near the cage, every time she checked the locks twice, every time she asked about his behavior. She wasn't doing routine work. She was studying him. Part of me wondered if she had trusted him more than she trusted me. When I reached the end of the corridor, I saw the outer fence torn wide open where the infected herd had climbed earlier. The breach wasn't a clean hole. It was a torn mouth of steel where bodies had slammed against it until the bars bent outward. I stood there for a moment, staring out at the dark tree line beyond the market. The air outside was still except for the distant groan of infected wandering across the old road and the rustle of wind pushing leaves against concrete. I spotted movement to my right, faint, almost hidden behind the frame of an overturned food stall. I followed it cautiously, gripping the cleaver tighter. When I stepped around the corner, I found one of the guards slumped against the frame. His leg was crushed under a fallen metal beam, and his breathing was shallow. But he was alive. He reached toward me weakly. "Boss." She went with him. She didn't look scared. She just went. I didn't answer him. He was too far gone to help anyway. I pressed one of the water tins near him and moved on. My job wasn't to comfort him. My job was to find out how deep this betrayal went. I stepped through the broken fence and into the open stretch beyond the market. The trees were cracked and dry from months of heat. Ash clung to the leaves. The ground was uneven with dried mud and broken branches. I walked slow, listening for anything out of place. The infected man's trail was awkwardly neat. No zigzags, no sudden darts, no claw marks on the tree trunks. Just straight movement. Jana's footprints were more frantic. She had run hard at first, then slowed. She was guiding him somewhere. As I followed the trail deeper into the forest edge, I heard faint shuffling to my left. 3 infected wandered in a loose formation, their arms hanging heavy, their pace slow and inconsistent. These were the common kind, empty, degraded, driven only by sound and motion. Not like him. They didn't notice me at first. When they did, I stepped behind a patch of brush and waited until they moved on. I didn't waste ammo on strays tonight. There were more important things ahead. I found them in a clearing about 200 yards from the market. A small campground had been abandoned there months ago. Just a few crushed tents and a metal fire ring that had rusted through. The clearing was bright from the moonlight breaking through the smoke. Jana and this bastard stood on the far side. She was kneeling, her hands on his arms, checking the restraints as if she were examining a wounded animal. The infected stood still, looking down at her, not with hunger, but with that same controlled focus I'd seen in the arena. I didn't call her name this time. I didn't want her to panic and make a stupid choice. I walked forward slowly, letting them see me as I came into the open. Jana rose, pushing her hair back from her face, breathing heavily. The infected man stepped slightly in front of her, as if to block me. It wasn't a lunge. It wasn't aggression. It was a protective stance. I stopped 10 feet away. Neither of them moved. For a long moment, none of us said anything. The clearing was silent except for the faint rasp of wind moving dead leaves across the ground. When Jana finally spoke, her voice shook. "You don't understand what he is. He's not like the others. He didn't kill that boy because he wanted to. He responded to the crowd, to the noise, to the pressure. He's reacting to whatever those people outside are doing. He's reacting to commands we can't hear." I waited, letting her continue. "He's not empty," she said. "He's not thinking, but he's not gone either. Whoever made this happen, whoever built those transmitters, they're using him, they're controlling him, they're experimenting, and he's trapped in it. He's nothing but a tool to them, a weapon." I felt the weight of her words, but I didn't let it show. "You freed him," I said. "You chose him over all of us." She shook her head. "No, I chose to stop pretending we understand this world. You kill snags like they're livestock. You trade them like they're tools. But someone out there is doing the same thing on a bigger scale, and you're too proud to see it. He's the only proof we have." The snags took one step forward. I gripped the revolver, but he didn't raise his arms or make a sound. He just watched me. The same controlled breathing, the same focus. And then, he did something unexpected. He shifted slightly to the right, creating a path between us, as if he were giving Jana space to run. And she did. She sprinted past me without looking back. I swung the revolver toward this infected, but he blocked the shot with his body, stepping into the line of fire like he understood what I was aiming for. Jana disappeared into the trees within seconds, her footsteps fading until the forest swallowed her completely. The infected man didn't attack. He watched me a moment longer, then turned and followed her at a steady pace, stepping carefully around the broken tents and drifting into the darkness beyond the clearing. I didn't follow. I stood there alone, listening to the distant echoes of their movement vanish deeper into the forest. The moonlight dimmed as the smoke thickened overhead, leaving the clearing in a dull grey haze. The market was gone. Jana was gone. Whatever had controlled the infected was still out there, growing stronger, smarter, more coordinated. And the only proof I had, this one, was now lost to the same force that had torn my settlement apart. All that remained was me, the burned ruins of what I had built, and the quiet dread that this was only the first test. Whoever sent the herd wasn't finished. They were watching, waiting to see how much more could be taken before the last of us broke. I holstered the revolver and wiped the dust from the cleaver, but the motion didn't settle anything inside me. The air around the clearing felt heavier than before, thick with burnt smoke and the faint sour smell that always lingered after the infected passed through an area. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the gap where Jana and that thing had vanished. The forest swallowed sound quickly, but I listened anyway, hoping for some sign that she had changed her mind or that the bastard had turned on her. Nothing came back to me except the distant creak of dying branches and the low rumble of wind pushing ash across the clearing. Going back alone didn't feel right, but staying in that spot any longer felt worse. I stepped out of the clearing and made my way toward the settlement, moving at a steady pace because stopping meant letting the thoughts catch up. The closer I got to the shredded fence, the more damage I saw. The walls were nearly split in half. The panels that once held steady under the weight of dozens of snags were now bent outward like someone had pried them open from the inside. I stopped at the threshold and let the silence of the place sink in. Spur Market had always been loud even on bad days. Arguments, barter shouts, tools scraping metal, addicts whining for credit. Now there was none of that. Just the flicker of dying lamps and the wind scattering debris across the dirt. I stepped inside and walked between the crushed stalls. The bodies from the fight were still there, untouched. Some were half covered in ash. Others lay sprawled with tools still in their hands. I didn't recognize all of them, but that didn't matter. They were my responsibility. This whole place had been my responsibility. Built from the ground up with spare lumber, rusted gates, and the will to enforce order when everyone else chose chaos. Now all of it was falling apart in front of me, and I knew exactly why. Someone out there had been watching us. Someone knew how we traded, how we handled the infected, how we kept control. They had taken the one thing we never questioned, the idea that the infected were predictable, and turned it into our weakness. They didn't just send a herd, they sent a message. They sent that man, and Jana had understood that before any of us did. The thought of her running with him burned deeper than the loss of the market. She wasn't just someone I trusted. She was the only person I let close enough to see the cracks in what I had become. And she chose him. Or maybe she chose whoever controlled him. I couldn't tell which was worse. I replayed the moment she unlocked the gate over and over, trying to understand the expression she wore. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized she wasn't unsure at all. She knew exactly what she was doing. She made that choice long before tonight. I stopped near the arena stairs and looked down at the blood-stained dirt. The crowd's footprints were still visible, twisted and frantic, showing where they fled when the breach hit. The arena had always been the heart of this place, brutal as it was. Now it was nothing more than a wide-open pit with a dead kid's bat lying in the center. Nothing moved, nothing breathed. The whole settlement felt like a carcass that had already been picked clean. Cleaning this place would take days. Sorting the bodies would take even longer. Getting the walls back up would require resources I didn't have. None of that mattered. Leaving wasn't an option. If I left, the ones who did this would think they had broken me. They would think they had erased what I built. And maybe worse, Jana would think I was done. But I wasn't. Not even close. I understood this world better than she thought. I understood it better than anyone still breathing. The infected weren't the threat. Not tonight. Not anymore. The real threat was whoever had figured out how to turn them into tools. Whoever had learned to steer them, corral them, send them at walls with purpose. Whoever had turned that man into a weapon that could walk straight into my home and open its gates from the inside. They wanted to see what I'd do. They wanted to test how much pressure Spur Market could take before it collapsed. Now they would see what came next. I picked up the fallen bat, wiped the dirt from its handle, and carried it out of the arena toward the broken gate. The night was colder than before, the wind harsher, the dark thicker. But none of that stopped me. I was done defending, done waiting for the next attack, done pretending this was just another bad night. If someone out there wanted to control the infected, if someone wanted to tear down what I built, if someone thought they could use Jana and that thing to break me, then they were about to learn exactly who they provoked. I set the bat on my shoulder, stepped over the fallen fence, and walked into the darkened trail where the two of them had vanished. I wasn't going after her. I wasn't going after him. I was going after the people who sent them, and I was not coming back without answers. And that's where we'll stop for now. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me how the story hit you. What moments worked, what didn't, and what you'd want to hear next. And a big thank you to everyone supporting the channel, especially with extra membership: Carlos Herrera, The Great Anywho, Jay Dalla, Madam Midnight, Deborah Powell, William Blackwell, TJR. You keep this project alive. Until next time, Survivor. Jack's Nightmares signing off.